Administrator to walk us through tonight's agenda.
We have several items on the agenda, so we're going to try to move through this. We'll start off with Ken Matthews and Randon to do the construction updates on the various projects as we're closing them out.
Good evening, everyone. All right, so we'll start with Linwood. We're finally getting somewhere, just about closed out. So this evening, you'll see there's a $30,000 change order that's being presented for approval. This is the one we've been talking about for months and months. This was a Stubner change order that started out at $58,000, and then we got it negotiated down to $30,000 to close. This is the last one that closes out the project. So from a financial standpoint, this is kind of the final status of everything. Contingency balance is $875,000, and this gets them done. They've submitted their final pay app this month as well, so that leaves everybody essentially fully closed out. So the only item really left at Linwood at this point is closing out the paperwork with County Conservation to close out the MPDES permit, which is really just it's paperwork, honestly, at this point. And then we'll get the final inspection from them, and that turns it closes out the permit permanently. I also just wanted to make note that it's hard to believe, but as of April past, the warranties on the building are all up. Those 1-year warranties are all done. There's a few other warranties throughout the building, some extended ones on some special equipment, but generally speaking, the building's officially turned over and closed out. So, any questions on Linwood? All right. High school phase 1, this has been, basically this budget's closed out. Any contingency was moved into phase 2. The only thing to close out with this, along with phase 2, is the MPDES permit that I just spoke of at Linwood. We have the same thing here. We'll just go right to phase 2. Oh, excuse me. So basically for the phase 2 work at this point, all the punch list items are all complete. The only open item at this point is the aluminum fence, which is just been taking forever. It's supposed to be here by the end of December. We finally just got a notice from the contractor that they were told by the manufacturer it should be shipping out finally. So that should really wrap everything up there. And in the same manner, we'll close out with County Conservation, the site work, close out the MPDES permit, and get that done. So presenting this evening as far as change orders, there's one small credit back from the plumber. It was just unused allowance money, so that's being credited back. And then we do have one electrical item. This is be the last change for the project. The low voltage AV audiovisual consultant. I think there was some confusion with the original design, but the fitness center really cannot function as a classroom, the TVs and the sound properly. We went through this as we went through the training and discovered the issue. So there needs to be some rewiring. They need some control panels to properly get it functioning. And that's, we'll present that for next week for $9,054 for board approval. But that should be it as far as all costs and changes for the project. You can see there's a contingency balance of $45,200. And then there's a small amount of allowance left, which most likely, some of it is the credit coming back, and there's a little bit of the electrical left. So we may be getting a small credit back to close out the project. But other than that, there's a few doors that we're still waiting on inside that have been an issue. They had to go to another manufacturer, same supply chain issues. So hopefully we get them in the next month as well. But that is it as far as the high school is concerned. Any questions with that?
You mentioned a fence. Where is that fence?
The aluminum fence, I'm sorry. It goes around the chiller in the back. Okay. We have temporary fencing around it now. So it's just, every month it's next month. It's very frustrating. So, but they finally got word from the manufacturer, so we feel positive that it's actually coming. Okay. Moving on to Chatham Park. This month, there's no change orders to present. The current contingency balance is $63,000. Phase 1 is essentially done. There's a few minor items. There was a few countertops that they were waiting on, that they had to go to another manufacturer to get. But essentially, that's it until, for now, until phase 2 starts this summer once school ends. And that will wrap up the last Chatham's 17 classrooms left to do. All the infrastructure is there, so it's really just kind of popping in and out of the classrooms to finish up the climate control. One of the good things, the chiller did show up. It was delivered a week or two ago, and they've started piping that, so that will be complete and ready for the spring. That will get started up. So as soon as, March, April comes, that will be turned on. And that's it as far as Chatham Park is concerned. Coopertown, same thing. Phase 1 is essentially complete, other than a few other countertop issues. Same problem as Chatham. There's no change orders to present this month. Currently, the roofing project was awarded that we had presented last month. So they've moved forward with submittals, et cetera. The key item was getting materials ordered right away, which they've done. And the good news is the lead times have come down some on the material, which is great news. So that work, the roof work, along with the 13 or 14 classrooms left at Coopertown will start next summer as soon as school ends. And that will get the building done and fully under climate control. So the other item is the chiller has been delivered. It's not on site, it's at the contractor. They chose to wait until the holiday break to install the chiller, so that will be done right there on the 26th, 27th, 28th. They'll set it in place and then they'll continue piping it, and that will be up and running for the spring. That is everything for the projects. Any questions?
I don't have a question, but I'd just like to say that, short of the supply chain issues that we've been talking about since COVID, these were fairly significant projects, and to my knowledge, they're on time and on budget. I thank you for that.
No problem.
There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of people, and I know JR and his crew have some support role in all of these projects, and especially when you
Certainly.
turn them over to us. And I just want to thank everybody for a job well done.
Yeah, it's a team effort. There's no doubt about it. Everybody had a part in it, that's for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. The next item on the agenda is regarding Act 57 of 2022. Back in the spring, Congress passed a bill that is now Act 57 that allows taxpayers who fail to receive a tax notice during their first year of occupancy of their new home, they can apply for a waiver from penalties or additional costs to the tax collector. The Department of Community and Economic Development is supposed to be making up a waiver form for the people to fill out. It is a 12-month window for that opportunity. As a result of this passing, every taxing entity that has property taxes needs to pass a resolution in preparation for the next tax collection year. This will affect our taxes for the 23-24 school year. It's not for the current year. So it goes away. It comes into effect during the next budget cycle, as it were. But we need to pass the resolution by January. So I want to put this on the agenda this coming board meeting, and there is standard wording that all I'm going to do is go in and substitute the district's name and present it to the board for their approval because it's required by the law.
When you say Congress, was this at the state level or federal Congress passed?
State level.
State level, okay. And are you aware of times when this issue has been presented from one of our local
Yes.
taxpayers? Okay, so this is providing some relief for people who are new to the district or new to owning a property in the district. Getting that paperwork, it gives them a 12-month cushion to kind of
They, from the point where they buy the property, if they don't get their tax bill, they can fill out a waiver to avoid penalties or interest on those taxes, and it's in that first year of ownership of the home.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, we do have some taxpayers that have fallen prey to this at this point, but I don't have the ability to waive it by local tax collection law. So as a result, this gives us the ability to waive it if they fill out the appropriate paperwork.
Okay.
And this is just waiving the extra fees, it's not waiving the
Right,
taxes.
it's not
themselves.
waiving the taxes, it's just waiving that penalty
So it's not gonna,
effect.
so there won't be a major budgetary impact then?
No.
Basically, okay.
Assuming no additional questions, we'll just move on.
Yeah.
And we'll move on to the star moment of the evening, the facility study. Jeff Straub and Alyssa is here to present more information on the feasibility study. Jeff, the floor is yours. Well, he said that
Front row
he
seats.
said that if you missed something, he could kick you, you could kick him,
Yes.
so you need to be close enough.
Excuse me. Okay, so we're going to do an update, but really we're starting to close down on the feasibility study. So what you have on the screen is an agenda. These are sort of some of the components of the study that we've been working through the past months. But tonight we're really going to focus, I think what a lot of people assume is the core of a feasibility study. We're going to be looking at the cost to upgrade your existing facilities, really setting up a 10-year plan, something that your facilities team can work off of. And these were both things that we've identified in the buildings, but also working with your staff to sort of cross-reference. And then we're also going to talk about costs related to construction options and how do those two sort of tie together, okay? With that, and before I really jump into everything else, one thing I want to note is we've done some presentations. I think even a couple draft components of the study have gone out to board members. We will, after this meeting tonight, the conversation we've had with the district is in the next 30 days, we'll compile the entire study, and that entire study will be turned over to the district, okay? And then towards the end tonight, we're going to talk about some next steps once you do receive the complete study, okay? So what we have on the screen is just an excerpt from one of the schools, specifically Coopertown Elementary School. Obviously, it's, you can't read all the numbers up on the screen, but really what we're trying to get across here is we created a 10-year matrix for each of the buildings, and then that feeds into totals for across the entire district. Okay, so it reviews all the major systems in each of the building, and then this does again tie to a summary page. I would note at the bottom of each of the schools, we also add an additional 20% estimating contingency. It's very nebulous at this stage, and the last thing we want you to do is plan for something and then want to add a component or something's been discovered to be a concern at the building that nobody knew about, so that you just have some estimating that you can work from. Okay. One thing I'm going to note, and I'm going to go to the next slide. This is an excerpt for the summary page, okay? And I'm going to use the pointer. Essentially what we're showing is a summary for all your facilities, and we're showing that at the top of this page is all the schools, just straight up facilities maintenance. And then we're also showing the schools if you would do renovations at potentially 1, 2, 3 of the elementary schools, specifically Chatham Park, Coopertown, and Chestnut Wold. But we have also identified work long range that needs to occur at your middle school and your high school. Okay, so what we tried to do was make you aware that if you were just going to do renovations and routine maintenance, you could spend easily $3.5 to $5.5 million a year over the next 10 years. Now, that would be fixing everything, okay? And you might want to do that as a district, and you might want to plan for that budgetarily. But the thing I want to stress this evening is both with the maintenance plan and with the options for renovations is, this is really a planning tool. It doesn't mean when we turn this study over to you that you must spend this much money each year and you must do these renovation projects. It's a planning tool for you, and you need to tie it in. You've got your financial consultant here this evening. You're going to need to tie that into what is fiscally are you able to do for the district, or what is your bonding capacity if you potentially want to move forward with projects, and then budget out whether you want to do those, follow this exactly, or you may want to stretch it out. The other component of this is that specifically we're going to talk about the middle school and high school tonight. You've just done some work at the high school. You're not going to do any work on the high school imminently, but you need to be aware that potentially there's a $20 million project at the high school in the future. So if you want to focus on the elementary schools, as an example, in the near future, what we talked about, just you need to sort of plan, okay, great, we're going to work on these buildings, but either 6 years, 8 years, 10 years down the line, we also need to be aware that we've got a middle school or a high school project that needs to be addressed. So just that best practices, and that's what Department of Education is looking for you to do, is really that you're looking holistically and that you just don't zero in on one building and max out your bonding capacity. Okay?
For the maintenance plan, are these presented just kind of prudent, routine kind of things, or is there some prioritization? Like, did you identify some near-term must
Yes.
address? And so if we look at the next couple of years, does that designate the most critical things to address first?
Yes. Yeah, we did spend a lot of time, and I know we sat down roughly about a week ago with your facilities, and there was a lot of wrestling of, okay, are these in the next 1 to 3 years, or do we push them out to 6 years, 8 years out, things of that. And there was a lot of discussion of what's the life cycle of how much longer can a roof last, or how much longer can a mechanical system or a generator, things. So we had those discussions. So anything that we are showing, for instance, in the next 3 years, we were showing 3.5, 4.3, 4.5. I would say that, I want to be careful there, not to say that you have to do all this, but easily a couple $1 million per year of that is, needs to be planned in the very near future. And then there is some of those components that's a discussion that you need to have as a district of, do we need to do all of this, and does that fit into your budget? Mm-hmm. So, okay. And this is also a working document. We will turn that final study over to you, but we're also going to be turning that Excel file over to you. And it's also not uncommon for, once the body of the feasibility study is complete, we're very often having conversations with you as a district, and, don't hesitate to reach out to us and, well, things have changed, or this grant became available, or we want to move on this component, and we can adjust the study accordingly. So, okay. So again, we showed the top category of all the schools shows, just straight up 10-year plan work, and then the lower chart breaks it down to, if you did do projects, it would drop your yearly work anywhere from roughly down to about $1.5–2 million. So, and not that you're going to do all of those projects, but and I had a discussion with Martha on this. What we were trying to get across was, say that you do a project at Coopertown or Chatham Park or whichever building, well, that would all of a sudden zero out the majority of work that would have to occur at those buildings. And the same thing, if you as a district decide to move forward with a project, well, it probably would be fiscally the best decision to hold off on any work at that school, because if you tie it into a large project, you're going to get a better economy of scale for the construction project versus trying to do lighting individually or replace a generator, things of those nature. Okay.
This cost reduction per year. That's the pink line there at the bottom. These are the reductions if all the projects are done,
If you did,
or if
yeah.
the planned 1 to 3.
If you did all those projects, and we had a debate in our office, we're showing you with all the projects versus none of them, just because it essentially creates two charts.
Okay.
Essentially, if you pick and choose the different projects, this easily could turn into 8 variations. So I think tonight we just wanted to show you the two extremes, and then just be aware that you have some efficiency if you put it into a project.
And if we plan some things out, about like 5 years in advance, like you said, I guess we could defer some of the maintenance projects. So it's a matter of, I guess, for lack of a better term, a matter of scheduling them if we're going to pursue them.
Most definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, and that might be part of it. Is yes, you might not want to move forward on all projects right now, but you might just, and this is very common for a district. It's sort of the next step component we're going to talk about, but it's not unusual for a district to say, okay, now we've sort of identified everything. Let's think about how we're going to plan this out. Okay, we're going to start off with one building, and we're going to move forward into design of that building in the next year. And then it's, a year of design, 2 years of construction. So roughly that's 3-year period. Maybe 2 years or 3 years from now, you start another building. You might plan a large project at 5 years, a project at 8 years. You're sort of planning out what you're going to do for the next 10 years. And that might change 4 years from now, but at least you put a plan for, how you might approach this. Very few districts would jump in and say, okay, we're going to move forward with all the buildings at once. And actually, we wouldn't recommend that.
Why money
It's
falls
better
from
to,
the sky, we'll look into that. But
yeah, it's better to start off with 1 or 2 projects, to sort of jump into that. Now, you've already done, you're actually finishing up some projects right now, so you've been recently doing some construction projects, so it's not like this is completely new to the district. But
And
we
that
do
was
see
somewhat
that
of the
also.
approach that we took, Jeff, at that time. Like, we started looking at, would we build a new Linwood? Would we renovate Linwood? We knew that work needed to take place at Chatham Park and Coopertown in terms of climate control. We knew there was a need for additional classroom space at the high school, and then we had to prioritize what
Yep.
that was. And as much as we wanted the climate control in the other 2 buildings, we knew that students were going to be arriving in the high school, and then prioritize those classrooms. So that was a multi-year
Yep.
approach to that work that's now, will be concluded this. In
And the
summer
nice
of
thing is,
23.
you have building, school system, it's not like, it's not a retail operation, so you are keeping your buildings for 30, 40, 50 years. So it really is about how do you set up this long-range plan and spread those costs out, so for your tax base that you are being efficient, because you're right, money is not dropping from the sky, as much as we all maybe wish it was. So
if you actually
just
find
creating
some
that strong
money when you
plan.
put the sidewalk in next time, we'll see if that
Yeah.
keep an eye out for that.
And
Okay.
Just one quick question on this
Yeah,
table.
no.
So the line for Linwood, which is our newest building, is zeroed for the 10-year horizon. Is that the way to interpret it, that it's?
Yes, yeah, and actually, I'm sorry, I should have jumped to some of these further slides. It zooms in a little bit, so it's a little bit easier to read. But yes, the discussion, and we did talk about where there's some minimal cost to have at Linwood, just some routine maintenance, but the costs were so minimal that we really just decided that building has just gone operational. Some of the systems are going to be under warranty anyways in the near term, so really there's very limited or no budgetary
So
concerns.
then
at
for any
Linwood.
additional systems, like for example, a solar array, that's not included obviously in the maintenance.
Exactly. That was actually unhighlighted. We're talking about the 10-year plan and the options tonight. And we did have that discussion that this is to maintain the facilities as is today.
Okay.
It's not, adding something additional, which the solar array, as an example, would be. So these are all about, and this is what the Department of Education wants to see is, what their goal is, that you identify every single thing that needs to be replaced in that building to make it current in its existing condition today. Not that you would do everything, but they want you to identify it just so that you're aware of it, okay? So again, just a breakdown of those, and we even went a little bit past 10 years with just a future column of there are things that potentially down the line, you could add or not to some of these buildings. Okay. So, yeah, again, I think in the highlight in the red, I had already stated that if you did these projects, you would reduce, the maintenance projects substantially. But again, that, can you move forward with those projects or not? But let's say that you would plan to do something at the middle school in 5 years or 8 years. You might say, well, then we do need to start deferring and not doing any of those projects for the middle school for 5 years, because why should we spend those money? And I've seen some districts take it to an extreme, go 8 or 10, virtually do no work at a building for 8 or 10 years because they knew they were going to be doing a major project. It starts to get into almost a very precarious situation at that point, but we have seen that done to be as efficient as possible that you can. Okay. Okay. The next slide we're going to go into is we're going to be more focusing on totals this evening, but we didn't want to get into the weeds, but we did want to make you aware of or just show you the level of detail. This is a cost estimate for one of the buildings. This is actually for Coopertown. What we did was we actually approached the cost estimating for each of the buildings from two scenarios. We did both a detailed line item breakdown. So this is the approach number one, and this is a 5-page cost estimate, which at a feasibility study, it's very detailed at this stage. So we're really looking at quantity takeoffs for all the materials, all the systems in the building. We are mixing it with a little cost per square foot for things like mechanical systems, electrical, but really trying to be aware of all costs. We're also trying to be aware of all your soft costs. So construction and contingency that had been mentioned earlier as an example, financing components, all the fees, related to not just the construction cost, but soup to nuts, what would a project cost, and be aware of that, okay? So what that, we're gonna, again, these set of slides are focusing on the elementary school. Taking that format, and again, we did that for each of the buildings, that yields a project at Chatham Park of about $15.6 million, Coopertown 16.3, and Chestnut Wold 15.8. Okay, and again, that used that detail budgetary. If you remember at the last board meeting that we presented, we actually went through sort of the layouts for each of these schools. I didn't want to go through those in great detail. We have those for backup if we need to go through them this evening. But just some general numbers. Chatham Park is 65,000 square feet existing. We're adding about a 12,500 square foot addition to the building. That would be 2 stories, or we're proposing that. We're also proposing a new administration for the building and a new library. Coopertown, a little bit, about 10,000 square feet larger at 75,000 square feet. Again, also a 12,000 square foot addition. And Chestnut Wold is the smallest of the buildings, 57,000 square feet, and the addition slightly bigger at 13,000. And again, Chatham Park and Coopertown are more, and we had talked about this at the last meeting, these are more renovation projects to deal with, for instance, modulars that you have at those buildings currently, as well as some reorganization of the building to sort of create grade pods within the building, and also have some breakout spaces for small group instructions, collaborative areas, and storage in close proximity to the classrooms. So really looking at sort of a 21st century approach. And this also ties in with equity throughout all your buildings. For instance, recently renovated at Linwood, or the work that's been done in the last 15 years at Manoa and Chestnut Wold. Chestnut Wold's a little bit different. That addition is a 3-story addition, and that's really more to deal with potential enrollment increases, which has been fluctuating with, understanding both the enrollment study that you've had done separate from this study, as well as some follow-up that we've done, is you're not seeing the growth in the short term that was anticipated. So, some of the discussion we've had is, in the short term, if you're it might be best to focus on Chatham and Coopertown, and then Chestnut Wold, see what's happening with the enrollment, how that adjusts. But that may, and that's really a decision for all of you, how critical is the Chestnut Wold moving forward or not. So, okay.
Can I just ask a question, since
Yes.
we had, just prior to this, the construction projects update of projects we already have done, and I'm pulling up the Linwood project, which has a total of 28 million for the new construction, and I'm just wanted to check and see that the 16 million for these additions, is that apples to apples for the 28 million that was on the construction, or does,
For Linwood versus Linwood?
yeah,
As
does,
an example?
like, is Linwood's 28 million, is that just hard cost of construction, and this, like you said, you included architecture, or?
I don't have the full budget, or I really haven't looked at any of your construction costs related to that project.
Yes, and the-
Or is the 28 million, is that construction cost only, or is? Okay, that's not soft costs.
I thought it was
34.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep, so just wanted to, since that number was just shown, just to try to make sure that we're keeping it in perspective, so
So-
like 34 million for a new Linwood, and these estimates of additions that we could do are about
I think the
half
high
that
school
amount.
expansion is probably pretty good estimation. If you look at phase 1 and phase 2 of that, we're talking about 16 million bucks for both of those initially. So, I mean, I think that's probably not wrong, it's probably a fair apples to apples comparison. And in addition, so it looks like we're in the ballpark here.
Well, and some of the things to factor in, and not knowing all the detail other than, we've been through Linwood, but you have some advantages at these buildings, especially Chatham and Coopertown. I mean, obviously, you're completing the mechanical projects. You're completing a second phase of the roofing this summer. That has huge cost impacts, obviously, of driving down the cost for these projects. Really, we're more talking about the additions, roughly anywhere from 12 to 13,000 square feet per building. And then some modest movements of program space throughout the building to get, to sort of modernize the educational program. We're able to take advantage of those mechanical systems that you just put in the building, which drives down the cost substantially. So, okay. And again, these are order of magnitude from the feasibility study. We've had some very brief meetings at all the buildings. So if you would move forward, the important thing is to set an order of magnitude and what you may or may not want to move forward with. And then as you select an option, hopefully we stay at that budget range, but you may bring something up that you really want to address as a district that might adjust those. But use this as a planning tool. Okay? Okay, we also took a second approach to each of the buildings, each of these three buildings. And so again, these are sort of the cost detailed breakout sheets for each of the three buildings. And what we did on this was more look at each of the three buildings, not just from line item breakdown, but current market conditions for construction materials or bids throughout both southeastern Pennsylvania, and then looked at that approach. And what we tried to do here was create a range instead of just giving you a hard number that we had done previously, and then cross-referencing, back and forth. And really, this is trying to create a gut check of, are we in the correct range? So again, Chatham Park is roughly 15 to 16.5 million. 16 to 17 for Coopertown, and 15.7 to 17.3. So they're all hovering around that range for each of them. Okay. And again, part of the reason we like to do that is sometimes when you get into those numbers and really start to drill down, you can lose focus on the big picture, and that's why we're just trying to look at that from a couple different approaches. The next was we stepped back and looked at the middle school. and the high school component. And a lot of the discussion was that really the focus for the study was the elementary schools. Some of the discussion was we've just completed a project at the high school, and that is true, but there is other work that has to occur long range at those. So your attention, just like we said, over 10 years, you might want to plan out some projects in the short term, the middle, say 4 to 5 years, but you also need to know that long range, you potentially have some work to occur at the middle school and the high school. And really what these projects relate to is there's really 2 projects that we've talked about at the middle school. One is a cafeteria expansion, and the second is really a systemic upgrade to the building. Eventually, those mechanical systems are closing in on end of life, as well as potentially you're looking at a roof project there. Okay, and we're going to break this out on the next slide related to the middle school. But what that generates is roughly $21 to $23.5 million that you need to plan for long term for the middle school. And then at the high school, you have completed sort of the addition at the one end for performing arts and fitness, as well as the classroom addition. But there's also systemic work that has to occur within the building for the mechanical systems. You have already started on some of those things. Example would be the boilers, but the mechanical system in general needs to be planned for. Also long term, there is a roof. You need to plan for the replacement of the roof. And we had a lot of discussion about the roof. You need to plan for it, but the type of roof that is on that building, it has no issues right now, and it might be great for another 8 or 10 years. It might be great for another 20 years. So we've identified that cost, but it's something you need to plan for. But you really need to evaluate down the line. In 8 years, you might say, okay, yes, we need to do this now in the next couple of years, or you might find that you've got another 10 years left in that roof. So, okay. So the middle school. Really, it breaks down into 2 projects. Phase 1 is a cafeteria expansion. Currently, with your population, you really got some concerns in the cafeteria, and what there's really been a large discussion is about expanding into the courtyard, which would be a natural ability. Courtyards can be very expensive, though, because you're really trying to build inside the core of the building. But we did evaluate that. You're looking at a $6.5 to $7 million renovation for that project, and then you're looking at the HVAC and the roof project, roughly 15 to 16. And part of the reason we broke those apart was, and this is really, as a district, you need to have this discussion. It appears that the systemic work, the larger project, can be pushed out some, but you may want to move forward with the cafeteria in the short term. That's a decision for you of is the overcrowding that's occurring at the middle school a priority, and is that something that you feel might need to be addressed in the next 2 to 5 years? And we're open to discussion with that, or if that's more of a discussion for you as a district. Okay.
Just one question. So
Yes, ma'am.
In the sense of overcrowding, it's really only in the cafeteria space, or is it overcrowding throughout the school that you're?
We did meet with. We sat down with the principal for the school. I think that the short term there was a discussion about really overcrowding focused in the cafeteria. There was also a discussion about potentially some classroom additions and a need for that. We haven't shown that in there at this time. That didn't seem as pressing right this minute. And part of that also ties in with the enrollment right now. It appears that you've got a drop occurring that's approaching the middle school, so that may be alleviated in the short term, and that might be something more long range you look at. If you would do that, a discussion that we had was very cost effectively. You can see this bottleneck in the corridor that occurs right here. Mm-hmm. We actually studied that there's the ability to add 1 or 2 classrooms on each side of this and then stack those vertically, and you could very efficiently pick up some classrooms for the building. That might be something, you know, if you decide you want to move forward with the cafeteria, you also have a discussion about that. But we were trying to keep the cost pulled down as much as we could right now, so we didn't add that into the study. But I know if we want to talk about that, we could look at that a little bit more for you before we turn in the final study. Okay. So with that, I think we were trying to keep it concise tonight, really sort of just, you know, again, not get into the weeds, but show how we were sort of generating some of these more detailed studies, but really what it generates is the overall, you know, total dollars for each of these projects, both in the options as well as the 10-year plan. And again, then that gives the district and facilities the ability to take those and start looking at each of the buildings. Okay, we're gonna plan on doing the generator at this building, or we're gonna do LED lighting at this building. We're gonna do boiler replacements, and that I would note. You had asked the question of the prioritization, most notably in the next like 3 to 4 years. A lot of that discussion was some of the things that we did push up to the closer years were focused on the energy efficiency. So things like LED lighting, boilers, any of those things that would see immediate return to the district. So, okay.
And those sound like that's aligned with suggestions we've already gotten from the district about kind of their near-term wish list projects or priorities to tackle. So,
well, I'm sort of preaching to the choir, but you were already moving even before you engaged us. You were moving in that direction. You know, obviously, you've just completed the Cooper, or in the process of completing the Coopertown and the Chatham Park work. So you've already been, you know, moving on those steps throughout the district. This is just okay. What's left and really needs to be focused on to drive down those energy costs and efficiency. Improve the efficiency in the near term. So let's talk a little bit. This pretty wraps it up. I've got quite a number of other slides. It's in the PowerPoint if you have access to it. Really, it's more reference purposes, floor plans for each of the buildings. If you have questions, we can jump to those. But next steps, we will turn the study over to you within the next 30 days. That will have all the components. So it will have the enrollment component, the demographics. Those are more generic sections that are just requirements for Department of Education. It will have the photo reports and the detail for each building, which is very lengthy, easily 10, 15 pages per building that really itemizes everything, along with the cost estimates, which, again, you know, that's sort of what, you know, allows you to start budgeting moving forward. With turning that over, you know, roughly in the January timeframe to you, what we typically see districts then is, and that's really the decision for you, is 3-6 months, sort of evaluate and really talk as a group, you know, what direction you want to move forward. Do you want to move forward with 1 or 2 elementary schools? Do you want to move forward with, you know, a middle school cafeteria? Do you feel that that's a priority? As well as how do you tie in your yearly capital projects into it, but really creates that roadmap. Then you can make selections of how you want to move forward. We are fully available during that time period. If you want to have us come back, that's one thing I think we always have is we don't limit the number of meetings. So if you want to have follow-ups or iterations of this, or, you know, what ifs of, okay, instead of showing the 10-year plan with all the projects, we've really decided we're going to focus on this 1 or 2 or however many buildings. We can make those adjustments very quickly and then present that data so that you can make a fully informed decision. So with that, I'll sort of open, you know, I tried to move through that quickly, but open it up to any other questions that you have. Or not. Yes.
On the bottom line of the first or second page, we have the $2 or $3 million projects that can be done. Are those all longer-term useful lives, the type of things, or the type of things you can be fixing or updating or maybe things that would last 15, 20 years, or things that are 5 years?
Good point. I would say more the 25 year, so it's going to be, yes, replacing boilers, LED lighting, things of those nature, all those components, even finishes. We're really looking at not installing things that you're going to have to deal with in the short term. You're really trying to set a building up for anything that's replaced. Really, you plan for roughly the 20-year time frame with the hope that potentially it might last 25 or 30 years. So, okay.
I guess, one question for our administration and facilities, or is there anything that you've seen so far that was like a surprise about either the condition of the building or some of the needs that came out as a result of this process, or was it more kind of confirming, what we understood the condition of the buildings to be?
For me, it was more confirming what we understand the conditions of the buildings to be, but also very helpful to see it all pictured together. So I agree with what Jeff said in terms of prioritizing. I mean, we know we can't do everything all at once.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, the next steps will be to look at those, unfortunately, competing needs.
Right.
There will be competing needs in some instances, and how we will prioritize scope of work that we're able to undertake. So, but Jamie's going to tell us how we can do that.
Yeah, it is, it presents them all as compelling and
Yeah.
possible,
Mhm.
like, what we might, I'm familiar with Chestnut Wall, that was my kid's neighborhood elementary school, and knowing the constraints of that space and seeing like, oh, an addition is possible was eye-opening for, the kind of smaller parcel that sits on, and how we know that that elementary school is using every square inch and nook and cranny of that building. So in addition to just kind of showing us that there's, some of the long-term needs that we've heard about, and seeing the roof ages and some of the major building systems, but then to see some of the possibilities diagrammed helps bring it to, more vividly what's possible. And I appreciate the both the kind of the rigor and the system that you went through, but also some of the creativity that you brought to see some potential.
And again, it can be daunting when you add all the numbers up, but, and we have this every time we speak with a district, that everybody they want to add everything up. But no district is ever going to fix everything at once, or over a short amount of time. It's, we're only pushing out for a 10-year because that's more realistic, but really, some of this you would stretch out really to, we typically see districts do 15 or 20 years. I can think of one district that they started in 2000 and they just finished their last elementary school in 2019. So it took them 19 years to get through all of their work. And now, because they're 90 years through, they're starting to think about the next cycle that they need to plan for, roughly out about 5 or 10 years. And the nice thing is if you get through all your buildings and then you start planning it out, they're now getting in the phase of, okay, we're not going to have very large projects. It's more of, okay, because we've renovated our building, if we start to get in a cycle, we replace boilers or we replace rooftop units, and it drives down the cost substantially, which then helps you with your tax base. So, which is some of what you're doing. You're actually already in that phase. So.
Yeah, I think Linwood is a good example of that, the investment in the new facility. Compared to the older buildings, that one's got much less in terms of ongoing annual maintenance and upgrades that's needed. So you get a bit of a reprieve.
And we're focusing on the construction costs. You also got your maintenance, and just staffing concerns, for a building that's been recently completed versus a building that has to have, continually your staff is having to deal with concerns.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay.
I have a question that is,
Yes, sir.
it's not related to everything that was discussed this evening. It's more a follow-up, I guess, to our last meeting. Just wondering, we kind of we're talking about getting a bit more granular and more short-term. We were talking about potential for looking at funding for some of the solar projects that we're looking at
Yes.
at Linwood and Coopertown. I know that the certain departments, DOE, for example, are starting to roll out some of those funding opportunities. I know that last time you mentioned that we're in a bit of a holding pattern, waiting to see how exactly the $100 billion coming out there would be parsed out. I guess
Any
what
update on that?
and update on that, and then yeah. Well, first the update, I guess. Then
Okay.
Yeah.
So to answer that, and Martha had actually forwarded us one of the first programs that rolled out. It was funny. Alicia received that same package from another district. We're all starting to see, multiple districts are all starting to reach out on that. That is the first one that hit the street. We did spend some time looking at that in the last week, and we're willing to investigate that more with you. My only thing is we're going to have some follow-up discussion with the administration. As we started to go through it, reading different documentation and doing some online, they're either rolling out $80 million right off the bat, or they're rolling out $500 million of the, however many billion. And my one concern was when I look, multiple concerns I had with it were, and I don't want to just shoot it down right now. I want us to look at it, and we haven't had a chance to talk to the administration because it was just, it just came out, started hitting everybody. In fact, I think there was a webinar just yesterday, the first webinar on it, and the slides for that webinar were available. The slides for that were just available yesterday, or I looked at them yesterday afternoon. The concern is they're talking about giving out 20 to 100 maximum grants
$500,000
nationally.
Yeah.
So that was my concern with that.
The minimum cost, I think, is $500,000, which does not even cover
500
which
to
would-
500 to
$15
15 million, I
mean, it
think,
sounds
was
like
and I scratched my head when it goes up to 15, but they're only giving 80 million out initially.
To me,
Anyways,
yeah.
so there's some concerns, but let's look at that a little bit closer. That's the first to roll out. It's at least something, a step
Right.
moving in the.
Well, and I guess my kind of follow-up to that is this one might not be the most appropriate option. I guess what my follow-up though would be is that regardless of which program comes out, I know they're all gonna be different, need to be tweaked and everything. What should we do, I guess, to prepare to be more or less first in line? I mean, I want to as soon as, whether it's a grant, whether it's just funding, whether it's, we've been hearing a lot of the broad strokes. We haven't heard any of the specifics yet. Would it be helpful to put together some kind of an RFP or speak to a contractor, or what steps should we take leading up to all of these releases? Should we do, or is there anything that
Related
that
to
we
the
can do?
related to
The grant, or just based on your experience with previous grants, previous funding opportunities, what do they typically, what will the grantees typically look for, and what can we do now as kind of legwork to prepare for it? I know, and I understand
Yeah,
every
no.
RFP has different requirements and different needed, information, but.
I don't have a full answer for you on that. I was trying to think about how to answer that. I guess what I would say don't prepare as much for a specific grant because you don't know what's going to be. You don't really know what's going to be coming. Probably what we've sort of talked about this evening of just have a strong plan in place for both your 10-year as well as what you might want to do with options, and start moving forward with those. Whether it's one building or in the next year, or we want to start with our first building 3 years from now or 5 years, whatever. Put that plan of really just, whether there's grants or reimbursed from the state, just put that plan in place that you start executing. And then as the grants come available, see how they fit into your plan. But the grants are going to be a smaller percentage for the overall investment that you're going to have as a district.
Yeah, that's fine.
So, but then what I would say, the plan for grants is be contacting groups like PADCD, Department of Community and Economic Development, CFA, which is the funding arm for them, Commonwealth Financial Authority. I actually reached out to the director of DCED. They were a little taken, they were actually surprised that they didn't see this one coming. It's because it had hit at a federal level, but usually they're tracking all the grants and can let you know what's potentially going to hit the funding stream or not. And some of that too is difficult for you to plan for because some of it is tied to the legislature at the state level. You know, some of these are federal dollars, but then some of these are state dollars.
Yeah, and I know that we discussed putting out an RFP, but then you indicated we should probably pump the brakes slightly on that until we actually see what's going to be out there. You don't want to get under contract with somebody and then try to retroactively get funding, I guess.
Yeah.
So
Well, and I guess I guess that's more focused on the solar.
I'm focused.
you know,
Yeah, I'm
solar,
trying to
but also the
listen on
projects.
that, but
Well,
yeah,
let's-
the
well-
overall building renovation
Yeah.
document we will definitely plan for.
Yeah.
That's going to be
So-
in the future. But I'm trying to think.
I guess in that case, I was talking more to the larger, like
I-
your capital
that's what I
projects
figured.
and construction options versus, solar component,
I'm
which
talking
we,
just
which we
short-term
did
for
say
right now.
to pump on, or to hold on those a little bit. Part of this is the next steps that I spoke to you about of, you're gonna get the study, in the next 30 days, so January. And then you're going to take a series of months to evaluate. I would assume that's what most, you need, as an administration and board need to talk back and forth of how you want to move forward. I would say by next spring, that's going to give you the ability then to decide if you want to move forward on both on these components that we've presented this evening as well as a solar project. And in the spring, you're going to get to a point where you need to make a decision of, do you want to keep waiting on the federal government? I'm sorry to be like that, but
No, it's fine.
sometimes it can be frustrating because something can hit the street, or you think you're being told it'll hit the street, and then it takes 2 years. And that's why I'm saying be careful about how long you wait for, which is maybe contradicting a little bit what I said at the one meeting is,
Well, no, I mean, it makes
in the
sense.
short
And-
term for the solar projects, because they're talking about energy efficiency projects, that you want to wait at least and see what happens in the spring. But what we saw was districts, as an example, that heard that reimbursement at the state level was there's been a moratorium for roughly 8 or 9 years. And districts kept waiting and waiting for the reimbursement. And it all depended on the state senator that you spoke about. There were groups that were actively trying to get it moving again, but it never moved.
Right.
So districts finally just got to the point, and I assume that you moved forward with Linwood as an example. But districts, basically all districts across the state, just started moving forward. And if those opportunities of grants or reimbursement or other opportunities come available, what we do recommend is then jump on them very quickly. And also as a board, be prepared. We've had districts where we've called special board meetings. Hey, a grant just jumped up,
Okay.
or the state made a mistake on the closing of the the moratorium on reimbursement and the new moratorium. There's a 2-week window, and we've had districts jump on that and pull in multiple millions of dollars on that. So just be nimble.
I guess
would be my advice.
the concern is that on one hand, we don't want to get in a contract with somebody and then find out that we missed out on, or that we, a month later there's a grant that we could have, easily gotten that would have saved us, X amount of X millions of dollars. On the other hand, we don't want to wait too long to a point, especially, I mean, if we talk about Linwood, the roof on that's 2 years old, 2.5 years old. Based on supply chains, and construction lead times, and so forth, kind of under the gun a bit with that. So, I mean, spring, I guess, is good goal, though. I think that's when much of these will be out there. I mean,
I'd like to say that's when they're going to be out there.
You can't commit,
That's when they
though.
say they're trying to.
Sure.
I guess just keep reaching out to those. We're reaching out as well. Everybody's sharing information, but then also have that long range plan.
Okay.
So,
Thanks.
I have a question, and it
yes, sir.
may actually be more for the administration. I'm looking at the 10-year maintenance plan and at that needs by year total line, and I'm just wondering if we have a seat of the pants annual number that we have been spending over the last several years, and how how these numbers might compare. So that, I don't expect an answer right now.
We did, yeah, we can.
So Larry, that's the 3.5 to 5.5 million
Yeah.
annual number that's shown in that projection.
Yeah.
Yep.
What you're asking is how much of an increase would that be
How does it
compared to what
compare
we
to
have
what
spent?
we've been
Yes,
spending
the last couple of, each year.
And is it picking up?
Okay.
You know, and I gotta say, it really is painting a bridge because, you know, 20 years ago, well, 23 years ago, we did our first big renovation of the high school. And, you know, we've been through all the buildings at this point, essentially, and we're back at the high school. And we're also looking at doing more on the high school. But we've touched every building. There's a couple that have, you know, haven't had quite as much time and money as some of the others. But, you know, I think that there's a short-term view that, you know, here's a new building and it's great, you know, and we get a bounce. We get an enrollment bounce. But in the long-term view is, you know, that building, just wait a while. And
Yes.
you're going to be spending money on that building too.
Remember when Chatham Park and Coopertown were considered the newer buildings
Yeah.
in the district?
So this is helpful. It's nice to have the big picture here, so thank you for that.
And just to put that 3.5 to 5.5 million per year in perspective, our total annual budget is 130, right? So it makes sense as an entity that operates 7 school buildings and other facilities around the district to allocate a not insubstantial portion of our budget to the maintenance, preservation, upkeep of those community assets. So, like that number in the context of our budget isn't alarming to me. It's, you know, a few percent of our budget, and it seems like those are the kinds of investments that are prudent to preserve the community assets of our school buildings.
So what happens next?
So sort of what I said is we will get you the study, the full balance study within the next 30 days. We'll be following up if there's any further edits with the administration, you know, during that time period. And then really it turns over to you to really have conversations between the administration and you as a board. You know, and what direction as a district you want to move forward. Do you want to move forward with some projects and set up that plan, or not? You know, or for the 10-year plan, what is really achievable financially for that? You know, is it the full amount yearly for the maintenance, or is it, you know, more, you know, a $2 million? I'm just picking the $2 million mark. What is that number? And then partly is some discussion with Jamie, you know, from, you know, what comes out of your budget and what is bondable.
Yeah.
So what's achievable as a district financially right now so, okay, well, we'll wrap up and probably.
You've given us a lot to consider, and you've hit, you know, some of the things that this board and administration have voiced as our priorities: the energy efficiency, the kind of equity across buildings, the wanting, of course, the buildings to be safe and modern school environments and to operate efficiently and effectively. So there's that, in addition to kind of modernizing the layout and accommodating enrollment. And, you know, there is a lot to consider and to try to weigh and develop as priorities. So I imagine we'll have some good and
Really
tough
interesting conversations.
Well, and I guess I would throw out to you, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that, you know, we just give you the study and then it's really up to you as an administration and board, because sometimes that can be a lot to absorb. What I would also throw out is, if you would like, once you receive that study, it is not uncommon for us to sit down with a board and administration and in a more of an informal format, do like a work session. You know, we literally take an evening or an afternoon or a Saturday or something, whatever works for you, and really sort of just hash it out, talk about it. And you say, well, okay, well, what if we did do this building in 2 years? And you know, and we can help with that, and we do that quite often. But I also want to balance it. Sometimes you as a district prefer to have that conversation yourself, but we can also help with that if that, if you're sort of, you feel like you are presented with all these different energy efficiency and space layouts and things of that, and how to prioritize that.
Yeah, I can imagine that being helpful, like having some time to absorb it, understand it, and then being
Yep.
able to come back to you and say, did we understand this correctly?
Or
Is this-
have some
how do we
Q&A
interpret
of
this or that?
Yeah, did we
And the
understand
what
this
if.
right or not?
Mhm.
So okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you.
I think you're up, Jamie.
I do not usually wear lavender. Disappointing.
Oh, well, close.
I'm gonna do 2 separate presentations, so your heads are gonna explode. I'm gonna pass out the first, so you don't look at the second.
Okay.
I know you already have them.
It's like a real teacher.
Yes.
My wife's a teacher, I get it.
Yeah.
Do you want us to keep them covered until you say it?
Go.
You turn them over.
Thank you, sir.
That's funny, today we, during our meeting, Jen gave some stuff out. She said, "I'm giving out."
Okay, so we have a lot to talk about. I'm going to try not to go into all the minutia of everything. This is going to be partly a planning conversation, but the first part's going to be about finishing up the first set of projects. So that'll be the easier conversation because that's really what we're here to do. But the second part, obviously, is with Jeff and Crabtree's feasibility study, which you're going to receive. I did get a sneak peek of what it could look like and kind of put together some very preliminary planning numbers just to give you some idea of what it could look like if you made some choices. So that's the second part, which you can't look at yet. I do want to talk just briefly before we get started. I know I won't go into an hour detail about the Inflation Reduction Act, but it is that particular product that you're going to see and municipalities and school districts and counties can take advantage of was completely geared for environmental impact funding sources, whether it's tax credits or grants and other things. I can see potentially, and I would point this out, we're a big firm, as everyone knows. We have offices in 35 states, and several of our groups are really digging deep into this. So it's a possibility that some of the buses that we're thinking about doing are going to get some benefit. Now, it's been dedicated for electric, and I know we're not doing electric, but we think it's possible the propane side falls in that category. So I'm going to do some research and get back to you. Solar is clearly part of it. It is tax credits to the contractors, which should lead back to a reduced cost on the solar side. Depending on how we structure things, potentially, you could be doing this. There's a lot to think about, so I'm not going to go down the road. Do it taxably, tax exempt, do you lease, buy? There's lots of things that are part of that concept. But again, these are little pieces of a bigger conversation. And then the third piece is HVAC as well. So I'm pointing this out that you've got professionals that are going to be kind of touching on this, and I'm hoping that I can at least provide some guidance on one part of this. I'm not only about getting you debt. I'm hoping to find ways to utilize these federal funds that are can be used throughout the country. So that's just good news, money falling out of the sky question, hopefully.
I like that kind, yeah.
Okay, so we're going to start. Martha, do you have do you want to put it up? Okay, so start the one that's called 2023 Financing Discussion. Perfect. All right, so it's a little sideways, but that's okay. So let's just turn to the first page. Okay, so no one's going to understand what the graph is, but you've seen this graph a million times.
But I know that's interest rates.
That is the interest rate chart that you've
That's
seen from
going
me. And just for the public, not many public are here, but the people listening, the plan that we went through when we started several years ago was to utilize several fundings to go from the big first project from Linwood down to the high school project and the roofs and everything else. And obviously, based on what I've heard, you've now done the bidding for the second phase of the roof. So we are in a position where we kind of know pretty much the final costs here. So the idea was we can't do it all at once. Let's break it up into pieces, and we'll kind of dollar cost average the interest rate environment over the course of time. And to be honest, it's going to work pretty well for us, because what you're going to find is, because of how the final cost of the projects came out, we're going to borrow less in total principal based on what we even showed you last year. So even though rates are higher now, it should kind of all work out once it's all said and done from a dollars and cents standpoint. So I think it'll work well. You'll see how it's going to end up. There's lots happened with the market in general, but I'm pleasantly and happy to see where this is all figured out and shook out at this point.
Right. And those earlier tranches that we pulled to support these current capital projects happened during a really low period
Very
of
favorable
interest
point.
rates. So if you're looking at the overall cost, we kind of got the bulk of the money borrowed at the most favorable time.
Exactly right. And in many cases, not to go too crazy into the fact that when you borrow the money now, short-term rates are higher, so you're actually earning more on the money that we borrowed. So the school district currently still has money sitting from the last financing that is actually earning something for you. Now, there's a point where you have to pay it back to the IRS if you go above a certain point, but this is kind of what's been happening. So it's not all bad on the interest rate environment. So that's the good news. So turn to the next page. Oh, we'll go back one more, sorry. Did one get cut off? Well, on what you have, there
I
should
see
be
it in my hand.
your debt summary chart. This is where we stand today. You can't see it on the screen, but this is your debt portfolio. Right now, total principal outstanding is $136 million. And that's reasonable given the size. Oh, there you go. That'll work in some sense. That's still reasonable in total of how much debt you have in comparison to the size of your district. So I know we will be talking out potentially about maybe borrowing more money for another set of projects, possibly. I'll touch into that when we get to that presentation, but understand, using this, looking at this is a kind of where we are today. You have a run rate or an annual payment of about $12 million right now when you kind of net out reimbursement and other things. Every year, you essentially pay back close to $7 to $8 million of principal over the course of time. So, there's a point where you can kind of afford adding new debt as the other debt drops off. And the questions you usually have are, do we have enough capacity? Can we do it from a legal standpoint? The answer is yes, you can. You have about $150 million worth of capacity that you could do. Can you afford $150 million? Well, that's a different story, but from a state standpoint, you got room. So,
And I guess, just to kind of put that in perspective, so the principal, you mentioned $136 million, which is about our annual budget, right? Like, do you think of districts in that same way? When somebody buys a house, they say, okay, well, you want to borrow something like compared to your annual income, like?
it's like that. Mostly we look at the annual debt service to revenues. So, you have 12 million, it's less than 10% of your budget.
Right.
So that's, again, reasonable that, obviously the rating agencies have looked at you and said, yep, you're a AA2, you're not over leveraged at this point. But, you start to add some things, maybe we're planning for this. So we'll talk about how that, in fact, again, I'm going to the page I didn't want you to look at because I didn't hand it out, but I wanted to point this out for purposes of discussion that, we can get there. So try to ease your mind a little bit. All right, if you could turn to the next page, Martha. Okay, good. So this is that famous colored page you've seen for years. It's amazing to say that, again, I'm getting old, I can't read it, it's 2018. We're now in 2023, so that took us 5 years to kind of make through all the colors on this chart. And we've now, hopefully, we've now locked in everything we wanted to do. So, when we first started this plan, we were kind of budgeting for about 10 million. And after you've done everything, now we're going to be in the $12 million range. And you did, close to $70 million worth of projects. So, let's think about that it went up $2 million for a $70 million project. And you're amortizing in total, 18 years or so, relatively short overall debt. that's affordability, it's the size of the district, it's the structuring. So, that's the concepts that we've been playing with here, and I think it's going to work pretty well for you. So the big picture here is, and this is where the good news is, if you look at that light teal blue, I'm going to base this off of last year's presentation when we sold bonds. We said, okay, guys, we're going to plan for a $7 to $8 million final cleanup borrowing. This is what we're going to shoot for because this is the estimates that we had from the final cost. Martha and Ken and I worked and looked at the final total cost of Linwood, the high school, put it all together, and some were a little bit higher, but some were lower. So we believe, based on these estimates, that we will need to finish up these projects about a 4.8, call it $5 million borrowing instead of $7 million to finalize the projects. That I should point out leaves some room for. There was, you might have saw from what Ken brought up, I think you have some contingency left over on a couple of the things. We'll have to, you guys can think about how you want to handle that. Maybe we can use that to reduce this even more. I just putting those out there. But the good news here is there's some money left over there. In addition, only pointing this out, we borrowed money for what is called capitalized interest, which at this point the district hasn't used to fill in the millage impacts that we've had. So you actually have that money that could have been used to kind of phase in the millage. So again, that's some extra money as well. So this is kind of big picture here, but we have a couple strategies that if we choose based on how your budget's looking, we can use that maybe to reduce even more. So maybe you want to leave some for contingency. Again, that's not my specialty. I'm just pointing that out. That said, if we make the assumption that you borrow, again, I call 4.8, let's call $5 million just for ease. The incremental increase on column 21 for your budget is another $200,000. We're doing that kind of wrap structure that we've been doing. It'll be a 15-year financing, not terribly long. That's on the capital. So again, we started around the $10.5 million. Once this is all said and done, we're going to be about, once it's all phased in, about 12.9, give or take. Once we finalize this, maybe it's 12.85, maybe it's 12.95, depending on interest rates. But that's where we think we're going to be at this point. I do want to point out what we've done the last couple years is we've done a second series of financing at the same time, and we borrowed for the next round of buses. So that is also shown here in the blue, which is the Series B. So even though we're talking about capital related to the buildings, we're even including the buses on this as well. So this makes the assumption you borrow about $1.3 million for the 10 buses, right? And again, that will be over a 10-year period at about $170,000 per year. So that's where we're at right now. This is, final. I think it's worked pretty well. I don't have the average interest rate on all the debt, but I think we've done quite well. I think, this last one will be probably in the 4-ish% range, wherever that ends up, whether it's low 4s or high 4s, we'll see where it shakes out. Over the course of time, we've been kind of in the 2s. So big picture, we did quite well with this.
And the energy piece that you were mentioning when you first started, Jamie, we would borrow less, or we would see some credits? What?
Yeah, so again, as
If
Jeff mentioned, the credits kind of, if there is energy-related projects associated with the balance of this, we'll have to see how, again, timing works, all the fun factors that go along with the federal government, as we keep talking about, not to pass the buck, but, in the end, if there is an ability to get a credit, through the commercial side, or a reduction in the cost because of a reimbursement of some sort, we can kind of work through that, and if needed, whether we've already borrowed the money, we can, essentially reduce by maybe paying it back in the future. Something we'll come up with an idea of how we would handle that if that were to happen. Yeah, I don't know if we're going to have the right answer by the time we're ready to finance, but maybe we will, maybe we won't. But maybe we could always, if you ended up with cash, we could always pay down principal if necessary. Okay. Let's see, I wanted to touch on a couple of them, other minor things here. Let's go back to the previous page. Sorry, Martha, I want to point something out. And this is sort of unrelated to the capital, but I want to bring it up because this is part of the big picture. Are you in charge of this?
Yeah.
Okay. I apologize. I thought Martha's doing all the work back there.
I know, I was thinking, like, how's she doing that?
You're amazing.
No, Chris works the magic for getting
Thank you,
things on
Chris.
that screen.
All right, so back to your debt structure. I always talk about refunding opportunities and things that we've always kind of talked about. One of the values of the rising interest rate environment has been, and I'm going to bring up a term, we don't want to talk about, but the cost of the interest rate swap that's tied to the 2009 bonds is much, much lower than it's ever been. And that is always driven by the interest rate environment. The higher interest rates go, the lower the termination value goes. The current balance, we'll call it, or the current termination value of that is a little over $1.2 million right now. That's a cost right now. Not to go into full detail, there's no analysis here, but I wanted to point out that we, back in the day, and that's long before many of you board members were here, we planned for the concept that if in the future there was an opportunity to terminate the swap and issue new debt, and I'll talk about the mechanics just briefly, and I don't want to blow your mind because you have a lot to talk about. There's an option for us to do that. There's been board approval that happened a long time ago. If there's economics, maybe we could be coming back talking about that opportunity to terminate and issue fixed rate debt. It won't save you millions of dollars. That's not really what happened because you're hedging. That's what the purpose of that swap was for. But it would potentially remove the swap itself and some of the liquidity facilities, you remember I've done letter of credit updates and there's cost for ratings and things like that to make it all work. It's not going to be a be-all, end-all, but I want to point out that this is something I'm thinking about. I talked to Martha about it a long time ago. But since I'm here, it may be something I may bring up in the near future, and how we plan for that is important here, because if that does happen, it would be, potentially a $30 million transaction because the debt associated with that is $30 million. So what would happen is you have variable rate debt, okay? So it's moving with the market. You have this hedge instrument that locks in the rate associated with the variable rate debt, and then there's kind of like ongoing costs that kind of make up what you've been budgeting for years, which is 4.318%, I believe. So that's kind of how we budgeted. If you remove that hedge, you'd be variable now, okay? So now you're just moving with the market. So what you would want to do is terminate the swap, issue fixed rate bonds, okay? But again, that could be at higher rates. You may net out about what you're paying. It just kind of, in my viewpoint, could open up, less administrative burden possibly. And that was the concept behind this a long time ago. So it makes it easier to understand when you see the termination value being much lower than it ever was, because the swap termination moves with the market. So it's not economically feasible right now, but I wanted to point it out as something that I'm monitoring, and maybe you'll hear me talk about it again. So not to blow your minds, but that's something that's changed in the market.
Okay, so to recap that, we have variable rate bonds, floating rate, that
Yep.
we have a swap instrument to lock in a rate.
That's correct.
And there are some mechanics and compliance things to go with that.
Yes.
But if the interest rate environment supports it, we could close out of that swap instrument and just do a straight up fixed rate based on current market conditions.
You're correct.
Okay.
Exactly right. And there's, ways to potentially, whether it's a bond issue, bank loan, we'll figure that out, but it's an option potentially. The market's a little off right now and it's getting very detailed into the kind of the cash market, which is kind of the swap side versus the actual bond market. So again, the economics aren't there, but because we're at where we are, it's a short term, the financing only goes out 10 more years. So there's options for you here. I'm not saying stretch everything out, but the point here is there's something to think about. So I just wanted to bring it up since it's a finance committee meeting and didn't want to hit you with it one day, but that's second conversation. Okay. Let's go back to the purpose while I'm here, though. Does anyone have any questions on the kind of cleanup transaction? I normally put like timelines and things. I didn't put it here mostly because I wanted to make sure everyone saw this first. Everyone kind of remembers when I kind of come here and I say, hey, let's go get started. It's kind of start to finish about 45 to 60 days between the time you start to when you get your money. So I know it's the holidays coming up, so I'm thinking we probably want to start thinking about doing some legal approvals in the meetings in January. You'll have your audit done by then, and we'll be able to kind of do the rating, things like that. If we make some determinations on the final borrowing amount based on some of the closeouts of the transactions, closing of the projects, and or that other thing I just mentioned, we can kind of determine what the plan is. But I'm thinking you'll see, if you're okay with that, you'll see me again in January, possibly with some legal advertisements and things like that. And we'll obviously, speak to Martha and the team about how we would handle that. But that's my thoughts here. So we don't necessarily need to do it in January, but usually January is a good time to finance in this world. So that's why I'm kind of thinking that way.
And I was just going to mention, because you said when you pointed out the teal columns on the new estimated debt, that you mentioned the 200,000 annual debt service or local effort. I just wanted to point out that that's for about half of the
That's
term,
correct.
and then the larger amount, and that's consistent with the way, and I think you used the word wrap.
That's right.
That other financings have kind of pushed some of the larger debt service payments toward the end, and then as other debt burns off, so that at the kind of the summary column, we're able to maintain a more consistent
Yes.
total debt service, which looks like it stays 12 to 13 million up into 2030, and then starts to decrease as some of these bonds pay off, and that's where you're identifying the next opportunity for us to add debt and borrowing costs.
Yeah, there's a couple, you've nailed it 1,000%. I wanted to point out, and this gets a little, again, granular, there is potentially, given some historical debt that you took out, that there's some debt exceptions attached to some of this. This is well before Martha's time and even some of the other business managers' time. So we intentionally built our drop off in the debt service to kind of have offset if there is a need to do something with the state on a debt exception. That goes back to Act 1 and Act 72 from a long time ago. So when Larry brought up we started this in 06 stuff, that was in fact, the time when things like that happened. So that's a Martha conversation with PFM. But I wanted to point out that we were strategic in how we thought about structuring this, with the intent that there's a possibility that there may be some things that we have to handle from the state standpoint related to debt outstanding. So not to blow your mind again, but that's what it was for. So.
All right, and what horizon is that on?
Well, it depends when the other debt starts falling off.
Okay.
And, to your point, when other debt falls off, we add new debt. So that old debt could have had some exceptions to it. So we wanted to make sure that when we added a new one, we didn't add too much new debt in those years, because you essentially could drop the millage potentially associated with that debt, which means you can't take it back. That's what I said. So anyway, it's a plan here. We got some years to figure it out, but I wanted to point it out that we're thinking long term here. A lot of minutia on the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and DC and the state, as well as our debt burden here. So, okay, so I think we hit the high notes here. So that was presentation number 1. So everyone, snapshot, remember that this page, and you look at column 26. That's the end point of the expected debt service payment of the current debt portfolio and projects that we're doing. Okay.
Yeah, the
Now I'm gonna-
12 to 13 million over the
Yeah,
next
with some drop-offs for
handful of years.
those reasons I discussed. So now we have the next thought process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so, all right, so let's just start off with how we thought about the first step of this planning process. So I'm going to use your memory banks from the previous conversation with Crabtree. So you might remember on that 10-year plan, there was a yellow box that was kind of highlighted that showed project costs.
Oh, yeah.
And it said 15, 16 range, and there was like a 20 and a 21. And that was essentially the elementary schools, the middle school, and the high school. Okay. He essentially said that the middle school and the high school were longer term, which is good. And then you had the bottom box he talked about, which were individual projects, which you guys asked, is that something we have in our budget that we can kind of capitalize? And then if you did a certain project, it would reduce the potential annual project costs. So what you're going to see here is I didn't want to show you, borrow $60 million because that's everything in that yellow paper. Because number one, it's so far away on some of it. And two, not putting anything in your heads here, but more than likely, you're not going to do everything. So I wanted to show you some ranges of financings generally on what it could look like if you borrowed 15 million, 30 million, and 45 million. As you know, with my fancy colored sheets, we can do that 10 different ways, but I just looked at it from a big picture, borrow this much, borrow that much, borrow call the most much, and do it at one time with some assumptions of interest rates, just to give you a flavor of what the potential cost would look like and what the end result in debt service would look like. The strategy on how we'd structure the debt was kind of no different than what we've been doing before. There's some wrap structures, things like that, kind of maintaining the concepts we've always done, which works quite well. So that's, yes.
Jamie, just so I'm clear?
Yep.
15 million or 30 million?
Or 45.
It's not 15 and then 30 and then 45?
I have 3 different alternatives ultimately. There's one
Okay.
if you just did 15, one if you did 30, one if you did 45. That's the idea. So it's kind of like you do all the elementary schools or you don't do all the elementary schools. You pick one elementary school or you don't, or you pick partial, I'm making this up, the cafeteria and something else in the middle school. I mean, that's for you guys to figure out. I'm just telling you if you borrow that much money, here's what it could look like.
Thank you.
Again, full disclosure on planning is really what this is about.
Right, and so we have concluded borrowing almost $60 million to do the new Linwood, the 2 phases at the high school, and to get us through the improvements, right? So and now this next one you're looking at would total most 45 in this scenario.
The way I'm
compared
looking
to
at it right
the
now, plus
all 7.
potentially you thinking about that maintenance side, and I'll talk about how you can potentially look at that as well. So again, it's going to be pretty simple. Not going to have the long sheet right now, but it's just going to be kind of simple summary pages of assumptions. So you've seen the interest rate chart, you already saw the debt profile. So page 3. Did you open up the other presentation? Sorry, there's another one. I'm killing you. They all look the same, as I should point out. They have the same cover. So this one's called long-term financing discussion.
Attachments aren't there.
Okay. Well, I'll describe it for the public either way. It won't be too detailed. No, that's okay. All right. So turn to page 3 of what I handed out. Okay, very simply, in 2024, so let's start with that. So I said, we're not doing it next year because we're already doing something next year at this point. So let's say I said let's get started on something in 2024, and you borrowed $15 million with an assumed interest rate, a little conservative, I would say. I'm usually conservative, but if you did that, we would do the wrap structure. You'd be able to amortize it over a 20-year period. That's kind of how we showed it. You can see there's a kind of a drop off because we're doing it this way just in case you borrowed more money in the future so you can fill in more principal. But if you look at that column 7, it goes from 13 down to 11, down to 5, down to 2. So if you then layered on more, it still gave you that kind of planning for. But the incremental cost to you by borrowing $15 million is about $250,000. Okay? So you're going to see a pretty interesting theme here because we're going to go up by $15 million. Do a little math here. You're going to figure out what the total millage impact will be. But same concept. So you borrowed that much money. The incremental impact is about $700,000. You'd kind of need get to a $250,000 to cover a $15 million project. What I put on the bottom of this page, and this is an important point here, it says, district may have $2+ million of ongoing capital maintenance that could be included in future borrowings, depending on the needs and the board direction at that time. So I asked the question of, what is the type of thing they're going to be financing? And he said, oh, it could be 15 to 20 years worth of useful lives. So conceivably, if you didn't want to build into your budget a $2 million increment for the cost of capital, we can finance up to 3 years worth of the projects, because there's a reasonable expectation to spend the money within 3 years, of that $2-ish million. And conceivably, we could borrow that amount, increase this borrowing, and then amortize it over the 20-year period. So you could have a budgetary relief by amortizing it. That's a policy question for the board, of course, but that I didn't show it, but I wanted to point out that because of the useful lives of what they're talking about here, it's possible you could still do that as well. So you can do, odds and end maintenance along with a capital project at the same time and still make it happen. And again, another $5-6 million, that puts us in, $350,000, give or take. If my math is correct, but that's what it would cost more. So I want to point that out, and that will be for each one of these. So
yeah, at the time that we would be considering those kinds of maybe smaller capital improvement projects each year, you're saying one option is to kind of roll it into the bond financing. Otherwise, we could put it in our operating budget and expense it in that year, or what I think we've been doing more commonly is creating a capital reserve to fund those, setting aside some surpluses or reserves that we have and being able to fund that. So we have several options, and this is...
Yeah, what we can't do is borrow all 10 years worth of the maintenance at one time, just like anything else. So
right, and you wouldn't want to borrow for something you're not going to spend.
That's right. And I know there was well, if we're going to do the middle school, why would we spend the money on the middle school stuff? So maybe you decide I'm not going to do that, so you defer that part. So again, all those little numbers in the bottom, I have no idea what they are, but you will eventually know what those are. And again, at the time, we can make some decisions if you want to include it in the borrowing or not, or a portion of it or not. Maybe you used $1 million of your cash and you borrowed $1 million of it. I don't know. We'll come up with that at the time. So just wanted to point that out. So now let's look at the next page. So again, if you borrowed $30 million instead of 15, again, I showed this as 2 separate transactions at $15 million each. There's no magic to that. That's kind of what I showed. There's a little magic to it, I should point out, but I'll get into the details later. So again, that amount, give or take, is about another increment of $700,000. Again, another $250,000 mil associated with that. Again, we can provide strategies on implementing an impact of your taxes and phasing it in, all that good stuff like we did before. That's another conversation for another day. But again, that's the cost of that. And then
I just ask a
Sure.
quick question. So between the 2 steps here, the interest is less in the step 2. Is that because you're assuming
It's a little shorter.
interest rate environment in 2025, or because it's over 19 years instead of
It's a little
20?
shorter.
Okay.
Yeah. We're using, I'm using 150 150 basis points above current rates. We are moving a year in the yield curve, and there's a couple of, it's very simple, but that's what's happening. So there's a change in the yield curve, and there's also just one a little bit shorter, and that's the two things that kind of change it.
So yeah, if we can pay it off in 19 years instead of 20, we save a year of
Couple thousand
interest.
bucks.
Okay.
But again, the idea was, you can see, we're showing the same kind of total end. Oh, good. Wow, good job. Might as well show the next page, Jen.
Wow.
He gets a raise. So in this case, the strategy is to kind of have the same maturity on all this. So that's why it's 19 years, because you're just saying, could we stretch it out a year? We could, of course, but that may not make any sense. Okay. And then finally, we'll go back to more colors. You borrowed that last, $15 million, again, now over 18 years, and give or take, it's, again, $250,000. I keep saying $250,000, but it's a little less than that. Keep in mind also, we're making the assumption that the value of the mill in the school district is $2,981,767. It's very possible it's higher by then. It probably is higher than it is today, with the number I'm using. So, that'll also drive, the value of how much mills you need based on the value of the mill at the time. So, again, big picture, this is all about planning here. But, to say that, again, I don't live here. I live in a different town. But, you can do $45 million, give or take, structure it, the same way we've kind of thought about it, and you'd kind of pay about $2 million-ish more in annual debt service from where you are today, which is about 3/4 of a mil. The question of, can you afford it? I think you can. Do you want to do it? That's a question for you. Will Moody's Investor Service, have some questions about, how much debt you have in your books? I mean, in the end, as I mentioned, you're dropping $7 to $10 million a year in annual principal, every year. So you're not going to be too leveraged out if this is kind of it.
What's our cap on borrowing? And
Yeah. So
relative to the cap?
as of last year, and keep this is as of last year. So I literally pulled this from the official statement we did earlier last year. You have a remaining capacity last year of $142 million in change. Given that it's 1 year farther down, additional revenues, more debt popped off, I'd say you're probably around $150 million from a state statute. That's what you're allowed to do.
And where are we now?
You're at 132.
So the 150 is on top of.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, so it's kind of odd. Yeah, you have $285 million of capacity.
Okay.
You happen to have 134 outstanding, and you can have about 135, whatever it is, 140.
We haven't yet borrowed half of what we are.
You're
permitted.
allowed to borrow.
Yes.
Exactly right.
Did
Yeah.
you say it was 285 million is what's
Three,
allowed?
285 million is the legal lending limit.
Okay.
Give or take, it's higher now, but as of the official statement from last year, that's what it was. And again, over the course of time, it should naturally go up because of your revenues increasing. The calculation is a state, I'm getting into too many details. It's the 3-year revenues of the school district, 3-year historic revenues, netting out some things, net of the outstanding debt you have. And what has happened is your revenues have gone up over the course of time, so the earlier years fall off, which are lower, and a new one comes on at a higher amount, so that increases your capacity typically, and you're paying down principal. Mm-hmm. So, it should be higher than I just described. So yeah, so your question of how much you can do, how much can you afford, I think you're probably okay on both. We always do, when we talk to the rating agency, talk about how we plan for these things. That is always a positive. I think, given the fact you're doing a feasibility study that goes out this long, that's a credit positive. You're always been in a great school district. The facilities are important to the people that live here. It could cost again, I don't live here, a reasonable amount in millage to do some of this. I don't expect a change in your rating, but I can't rule it out either, just because you just never know. But I don't think it's too crazy. I will point out, and there's districts right now, they're looking at feasibility studies of $700 million in some cases. It's a costly business to be in, facilities. So, I think you guys are thinking about it the right way. You're doing these in phases of projects. I know you'll be smart about which ones you do and the most efficient ways to do it, and hopefully find some money falling from the sky to kind of offset some of the cost of those things. But, I think it's affordable to some extent. But you have to make decisions on how you'll pay for it. So that's all the numbers I have for tonight. But I think I at least wanted to give you something to chew on. But again, not to overcomplicate it, that previous presentation, that's what we should generally focus on for now. If I, have a future conversation about that other thing, about terminations of things, I'll be in touch. But at least for now, let's, plan for a potential financing in the first quarter of 2023. And I'll be back, and legal team and everyone else will get started on that. Great.
All right, thank you. It was, I appreciated having this after seeing the feasibility and, the needs and the wish list of all of that. And I think it would be, appropriate to stop and say, oh, that looks like a lot, but this helps put it into some context about what is manageable within the debt structure we already have in place, and the opportunities that it provides us going forward. So those were nice to have those together on the same night, so we can kind of start to weigh some of the possibilities.
Yeah, and I guess one last thing, only to bring it up because Jeff brought it up, but obviously I mentioned earlier, this does not talk about the middle school and high school. So you always have to kind of keep in the back of your mind that there's always potentially something in the future that could be considered as well. So, I know you'll think about that, but I wanted to bring that up as well.
Right, but just as a scenario, and I know at other times when we've looked at, the whole cost of Linwood, because of the construction duration and some advantages in the way that we borrowed money, we didn't borrow all $35 million at once. We did it in pieces over time as the funds were needed, as the construction progressed, and we're able then to lay in more comfortably to our budget. So I would imagine we could have a similar strategy if we were looking at some of the bigger projects.
Exactly
going
right.
forward.
I hate to say kudos to the board, but the fact that we didn't utilize the capitalized interest that I set aside for you is, both, good news for the district, but it was also planned very well. So, we try to do everything necessary to kind of offset things, but it'll come back to you in the future to reduce your borrowing.
Well, you've steered us well on these things. I think we were lucky in terms of, the timing and how that went with the market and the interest rates. But thank you for, looking ahead and finding the opportunities for us and helping us package and structure this so we can make these significant improvements and investments in the district.
Thank you. Well, that's all I got. Thank you again. I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
I will see you next month.
Yep.
Sounds like it.
That's it for the
That was it, right? That was it for the business portion of the agenda. If there's anybody in the public who has a comment, it's that time on the agenda. Seeing none, then our business is concluded and the meeting's adjourned. Thank you.